Welcome to So-Called Discoveries, where we discuss stories, knowledge, and insights from somewhere and try to learn something. My name is Anthony Ozzie. In today's episode, I have a conversation with my guest, Catherine Cruveillier. She is a sustainable development expert and an experienced leadership coach. She's also the founder of Planet Emotions. Our conversation is largely centered on emotional intelligence, feelings, effective communication, and many other things around that area and around the work that she does. And we do get a little bit of a peek into the work that she does with clients as a coach and in sustainable development. If you do enjoy this conversation, there's information in the show notes on how you can connect and reach out to both me and to Catherine, so make sure you do that. Until then, here it is, my conversation with Catherine Cruveillier. Hello, Catherine. Thank you very much for joining me today on So-Called Discoveries. I'm glad to have you here.
Good morning, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning.
Yeah. I definitely want to dig into your background and understand your story a little bit better, and sort of where you come from and what led you to your current passion and on your current mission, and what led you to the woman that you are today and working on this business that you have today and everything like that. And I want to spend a little bit of time in that in the beginning, but I want to make sure that everyone in the audience understands, we're all on the same page and we sort of understand what your area of expertise is, what your passion is, what your vision and your mission is, and just a little bit about your business. So just understanding that we're going to talk about those things in greater detail, could you give us a little bit of the highlights about that type of stuff?
Okay, so we start with what I believe are my areas of expertise.
Sure.
Is that okay? So I believe I am an expert in 3 areas that sort of combine themselves, and I'm really an expert of the combination of the 3, if that makes any sense. And those 3 areas are what is called sustainability or sustainable development. And the second area is emotional intelligence, how we use our emotions to do better in life. And the third one is leadership, how to be a better leader. So those 3 things combined, I think, are my area of expertise. And that's where my mission is, where my business is. So
yeah,
I am living.
I'm really excited to dig into those for just purely for my area of interest, especially the emotional intelligence and leadership stuff, because those are like very obviously sustainability is relevant to everybody, but those 2 are very relevant to me in my own sort of personal interest and my own sort of purview of things that I'm naturally sort of drawn to. But I want to dig into all of them. Would you mind talking a little bit about how you see the common thread, how they relate, and how that ties into your vision and your mission, and then your business?
Yes, well, it's an interesting question. How I will say to you how they relate for me.
Of course.
I was born in a family of rural people, so my grandparents were farmers, and my dad became a teacher, but his main area is scientific, so he was at some point a natural sciences teacher, and he loved nature. So my dad taught my siblings and I to respect and protect nature, know nature. And when I say nature, I mean not just what is outside of us, but it includes us. That I think that's the difference I have with my dad and other people who study nature, that I don't consider that nature is something different from us. I think we are nature. And at least I include human beings in nature. And it's all one big thing. And so there's that. The second piece is I was born a hypersensitive person. And what that means is that we feel more than average. At the beginning of my life, I was bombarded by all sorts of feelings and emotions, and particularly very uncomfortable ones. So it was pretty horrible in the first part of my life, and then I gradually understood, I have to say, by myself almost, because one of the things that I had to go through is to be misunderstood. All the people who were more scientific and more reason-oriented, logic-oriented, wouldn't necessarily understand the type of behavior and reactions that I had. I was always told, "Oh, you're overreacting," blah blah blah. I was always overreacting to anything. So I had to make sense of that, and over my life, I simply understood I had a gift. So basically the curse became a gift. I understood that my emotions were actually messengers that were trying to tell me something, and I understood their language, what they are telling us. And they are in fact guiding us. My emotions are guiding me, and I understood so many things thanks to my feelings and emotions. Feeling and emotion is not the same thing. We can come to this, but so that's the other piece. My mission can only be what I am good at doing and what others need, and if possible what I can be paid for. But not only that, my mission is what I bring in nature, in universe. And so it is around what I have learned and what my gifts are. And I think I have reached now a point, not just now, but I have been reaching a point where I was totally able to share my gift with others. And I believe it's very much needed in the world today. I believe more people need to understand their feelings in order to make better decisions, and that ties to leadership. My main background is in business and administration. I've been myself a leader in sustainable development in many organizations. I have led big programs that change behaviors across several continents in the world. So it's part of my mission to help leaders, and particularly world leaders today that are dealing with the big issues that our planet is facing and humanity is facing, to understand better what's going on, understand their emotions better, and use their emotions alongside science to reach the better world that everybody talks about. That is my mission.
Excellent. Thank you so much for going into that. I feel like there's potentially a lot of potential. I jotted down some things. There's a potential jumping off points for things that we could potentially discuss a little bit later on. A few of them. It's you mentioned that you tend to be a little bit more of the feeling type. You're a big feeler. There's a little bit of the spectrum of feeling versus thinking, and the logic and the reasoning. And I know for myself, I tend to be more on the thinking and logic and reasoning side of things. If you can think of it as a spectrum, I tend to be more on that side of the spectrum. And it's something that when I've had relationships, whether they're actual relationships or professional relationships or something, I'm working on a project with somebody, working very closely with them. I've had times in the past where I was working with people who were more on the feeling side, and I sort of had to learn how to communicate a little bit differently than my natural instinct to communicate would be with them. So maybe we can talk about that in a little bit, and maybe like the different aspects of personality, if that's relevant. And different things like using emotions as your guide, and the feelings versus emotions, and the science of it. I'm very interested to talk about that sort of thing. But before we get into that, you started to talk a little bit about your background when you mentioned your father and your early things. Would you mind just talking a little bit about where you come from and what your life was like growing up? And you said I know you have an international background for professionally and otherwise. So yeah.
I do. So yes, I was born in Limoges. That's a city in the center of France. I am a French American. I have dual citizenship. When I was 3 months old, I took a plane with my mom to go to Vienna, Austria, where my dad had his first job as a teacher. And that was the beginning of a long story with my parents traveling, living in different countries. My dad and my mom were teachers, and they were working for the French schools abroad, so we lived in Austria, in Mexico, in Brazil, and then my parents and siblings went to Canada, and that is when I went to study back to Paris, but I would visit them also in Canada. So I had an international life starting at 3 months old. And then I just continued in my career because I loved this life of meeting other people and understanding their different cultures and values. I thought it was fabulous. There was another reason for that, and that was because growing up in Mexico and in Brazil, for example, I could see that there were issues such as poverty and inequalities, and in the case of Brazil at the time I was there was also a military dictatorship, so I could see in the daily life how censorship and things like this could affect life. And I wanted very much in my heart to find a job where I could come back to these beautiful countries that I absolutely love and continue in help sort out and solve these issues somehow. So I had this dream of working for the UN, and I realized my dream. I worked for the United Nations Development Program initially, and then for the World Bank. But I am sort of perhaps getting out of your initial question. Did I answer your question correctly?
No, yeah, I'm just interested in your background and traversing through your experiences that have led you to this point that you're at, and understanding like sort of like how your vision and your mission has sort of shaped itself and changed over time based off your experiences. That's what I'm kind of interested in right now. Yeah.
That was so those things are important. I believe that it's also important to say that to speak about the most important trauma that defined the rest of my life. I think it's important to speak about this because it might be useful to the audience to understand more things, especially about the hypersensitivity and things like this. When I was about 4 in Vienna, I contracted a very serious disease. The disease was called purpura. It was sort of piggybacking to rubella. And a lot of kids were having this disease then, and a lot of them were dying, like most kids were dying of it. And the family doctor diagnosed this very quickly. And he just rushed me to the hospital in an ambulance, I believe. And here I am in this hospital with a horrible nurse that was a nun. At the time Catholic nuns would be nurses, and I am being washed by this woman in a ancient bathtub, and then I'm put in flannel pajamas that is striped, and then I'm put in this bed, in this crib, and nobody says anything to me. I just don't know what the hell's going on. I'm terrified, and I am put in this crib, and I don't see my parents until after about a week or two. But it was too late. I had been abandoned, basically. And to me, at this age, your parents are your whole world. To me, the world ended that night. And that has been extremely defining, because it took me decades, until my early 50s, to actually fully resolve, and I don't really think it's fully resolved, but to resolve a big part of this trauma. This trauma made that and this I am able to say today, of course I wasn't able then, but the child interpreted that love equals abandonment. And all the other forms of love were hidden. So as a result, I only attracted people in my life afterwards who would abandon me in one way or another. They would either die or leave me, abandon me. I mean, good friends, lovers, you name it, they all abandoned me. And I was constantly having to face this terrible, horrible emotion of absolute loss, as if I did not exist. You do not exist when this happens. And I had to recover from this, and I did. And I did in the way of understanding my emotions, etc., like most people do when they recover. I had some help, but not a lot. Books, prayers, things like this helped me. But that was quite defining in my life.
Yeah.
And so
Do you mind if
I believe that if you have experienced such a big hurt, well, then you can help others. Today I can help others out of hurt, and I can go very far. I'm not afraid of people, for example, of people who are suicidal, because I know what it is exactly to be there. I have myself been there in my early 30s. This is the big crisis when I decided, oh no, we're not going back there, we're going up in the light again. And I can do that. And I can help others with that. So
thank you so much for talking about that experience and sharing that and how it's affected you. One thing that I wanted to ask you about, if you're comfortable addressing it as or thinking about it, when you were going through what sounds like a very long period or a prolonged period of darkness, as throughout your life, or like different parts of your life maybe, that is sort of related to this early trauma and stemming from it. You mentioned that like you began, through other relationships or partners or whatever in life, you began to attract people who would abandon you, and you began to recognize that. I'm just curious, like, if you're able to think about like how much of that was what you were attracting because it was what you knew and what you were familiar with from your trauma, and it was what you understood, and then if that's, maybe this is the same thing, but like how does that relate to, were there maybe just like cycles or patterns or behaviors that were negative or destructive that you had done that were resulting from your trauma that you had to work through It's like, what's the relationship between like you attracting certain people and you sort of like having patterns that you're working with yourself that end up leading to things? So I'm just, does that make sense? That was sort of a jumbled question, but I'm trying to understand if you've thought about that at all in your experience, the difference between like attracting people because it's what you know and what you're familiar with versus you having sort of destructive patterns and cycles that are then perhaps maybe influencing things that related to abandonment or whatever. It's just me without knowing your situation.
No, I think it's a great question. It was a little jumbled, I agree, but let me try and answer this.
Yeah.
I believe it's the same thing, because here's what I've learned about emotion. And let me preface this, what I'm going to say, with defining what I believe emotion is. And why I do that is because there is controversy today about what emotion really is. So let me tell you my definition, and then we'll go from there. I believe emotion is, first of all, a very tangible thing. To me, emotion is an electromagnetic field and signal that emerges in somebody's mind and body. And it vibrates at different vibrations. And so you have a different vibration for all the different emotions. That has three aspects in my definition. A feeling aspect. So we're feeling the vibration in our body as a vibration. And, different frequencies. A thinking aspect, the story that is related to this feeling. And that is with words and strings of words, and sometimes images as well, which is another type of thinking. And the third aspect is the movement of the body that is fueled by the emotion. The emotion fuels the body into a direction. Every emotion is going to be associated with, because it is energy, and it's moving matter to a certain shape and form of the body. Therefore, absolutely, it's all related. My behavior with the patterns that you described that were negative absolutely led to having these events in my life, in these relationships in my life. So that was my part. But the magnetic part of the electromagnetic field also attracts in others similar vibrations that are in them. So basically, in this abandoner relationship, we hold both inside of them. I was a dominant abandoned, but I had an abandoner very present here, even though not dominant, but I was attracting the abandoners, and I was doing everything for that unconsciously. My behavior was absolutely leading me to that, because emotion has these three aspects. So it's behavior, shape of the body, movement, feeling, and thinking, the stories. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. I think it very much does. It's very much all the same, it seems, and
it's three aspects, but they work together. It's like a trinity to have an experience.
And it makes sense. I mean, it works for the positive too, right? If you have somebody who their emotions and their energy is extremely positive, and it emits that, and you feel that from being around them, they're probably going to get into connections or attract people that are also in that wavelength, right?
Absolutely. And there's positive and negative in everything. So even though I told you about the negative parts, there were very positive aspects to absolutely everything that I lived. And I can say today that frankly everything was positive, because even though I went through hurt and suffering, it led me to what I consider today an absolutely magnificent life.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It reminds me of a parable or a story, and I can't really remember it exactly, but it's something along the lines of like, you know, somebody's, you know, there's two men are having a conversation, and they're just he's talking about all the things, one man is telling him about all the things that has happened to him in his life. Like he's saying like, oh, the military came to my village and they took my young son from my house, and they went to have him go fight in the war. And then he says, oh, that's so awful. And he says, well, I don't know if it's awful yet. And then he comes back a little bit later, and it turns out that there was maybe a famine in the entire village, and many people died and got sick, and if his son was there, maybe he would have been injured. It's like a whole list of things where he says, is this a bad thing? I don't know yet. Is this a bad thing? I don't know yet. Oh, I broke my leg, but because I broke my leg, I didn't go out into this area where something happened, and or maybe I broke my leg, and the love of my life was the nurse that was taking care of me, or something like that. So it's just all these things happen that are like, you might think, oh, that's awful, but it's like, I don't know if it's awful yet. We'll see what happens. So it just kind of reminded me of that parable.
Yeah, it is true. In the end, I believe the duality of good and bad are only apply in space-time. So basically, something is bad for a particular thing at a particular time, but not overall. In the absolute of things, there's nothing that is negative. So everything's positive. And in fact, it's even ridiculous, because if everything is positive, you just do not have duality at all in the absolute. The absolute feels pretty good. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about like some of your early background. Could you talk a little bit about your education? Maybe starting with where were you in like the years of in what in the U.S. we would consider high school?
Okay, so I was in Brazil. I was in São Paulo.
So how did you get from Vienna to? So there was a lot of years in between. So like was there other countries in between, or?
Yes, we went from Vienna. So and then we left Vienna. I was about 6. I was 6. We went to Mexico City. And then we stayed there in Mexico City until I was about 13. Then we went to Brazil, in São Paulo, where I did my high school.
Were you moving for your parents' work, for their careers?
Yes. My parents were teachers in French schools abroad, and they were assigned to French schools abroad, and my dad would say yes or no, but he mainly said yes to the propositions that were made to him, and that's how we traveled from Austria to Mexico to Brazil, and then my parents went to Canada.
Do you have any thoughts?
To study.
Do you have any thoughts on being educated in different countries and what it's like going to school in different countries? Obviously, you did different levels, different ages, but do you have any thoughts on the differences?
You mean, well, first of all, I think it's fabulous to have different experiences as early as possible in life. And you can get those by traveling. Traveling and changing countries is one way of having very different experiences, because this enriches your life. It enriches and it helps you grow faster than when you don't have those things. Growing is really faster and better if you have multiple experiences of different kinds. So encountering different cultures and having to deal with different challenges, all of this is extremely good. I couldn't, of course I know that there are differences between Austria and Mexico and Brazil, but that's all good. I love difference and diversity, and they are all wonderful countries with wonderful aspects and also not so good aspects, but all of them, all the countries are the same in that respect. France also has good and bad aspects, and the United States as well. And both are useful to know about, to learn. Both are important. Both constitute something you can learn from.
Yeah. So when you're in, perhaps we can think about when you're in, you said you're in Sao Paulo in Brazil?
Yes, Sao Paulo in Brazil, yeah.
So if we think about when you were in Sao Paulo in those years, did you have, your parents were teachers, so I have to imagine that you at least had some thoughts about thinking about your future or what you were going to do with your life, maybe a career, or like what your education was going to look like. Did you have, if you think back, do you have a sense or an idea of what your thoughts about what you wanted to do with your life were back then?
When I was growing up, I didn't exactly know what I wanted to be. I was attracted, I had models in my life. I was attracted, for example, by this, I think it's called a volcanologist, specialist in volcanoes. His name was Haron Tadziev. He died. He's dead now. I used to admire him and his courage and his, being able to go near the fire of the volcanoes so many times. So I had these models. I used to admire as well pilots. I at some point I wanted to fly planes, to be a pilot. I absolutely loved pioneers and discoverers. Like I remember I was in Mexico and I was watching this on TV when the American astronauts landed on the moon, and that was fabulous. I do have a pioneering virus. I didn't do that. I don't do this type of things, but I did pioneer ideas. I, for example, was part of the teams at the United Nations Development Program and at the World Bank that defined what sustainable development is, what it would entail, what kind of projects we would, how that could be implemented on the ground, etc. So I'm a pioneer in those areas myself, and I was attracted by pioneering people. There is this guy today, Bertrand Piccard, who flew the solar-operated plane, Solar Impulse. I followed the entire story. I still follow him. He's a model to me in many respects. And by the way, he's also a leader in sustainability. So those were the things I wanted to do, but I had not a very specific idea of what I wanted to do. So I ended up choosing to do a business school in France, and I passed on the competitive exam to get in. It's called HEC Paris, and I went there. I know that I wanted to go there because I could see that the alumni of the school were everywhere on the map, from priest to author to CEO of large corporations to artists. So there was still a possibility to choose, basically. And I knew I was acquiring a high level of high quality of education in many different fields that I was sure would help me, and it ended up being true. I did learn a lot of things that served me, but it was the business school, and so that's my main background. And my major was in economics of the agricultural sector at that school. And then remember I told you earlier I had this dream of going back to those countries and working for the UN, and that's what I did. It happened.
Was that after you graduated from, was it HEC? Is that what you said it was?
Yes.
Was that after you graduated?
After I graduated from HEC, I knew I wanted to start at UNDP, the United Nations Development Program, but I needed a job immediately, so I started working as a junior consultant in 2 consulting firms. One of them was actually in Martinique, so I spent 1 year in Martinique in a consulting firm. I was doing market research studies and things like this, defining strategies for large corporations based on market surveys. But that was for 2.5 years, and then I finally got my first job at UNDP, and that sent me back to Brazil. I went to Brasilia for my first job with UNDP was there in Brasilia, Brazil.
What were you doing?
Which was exactly my dream. And let me point out that I've been pretty good at actually manifesting my dreams. Yeah. And I still do today. I've always had what I dreamed about.
Do you have any insight as to why that is? Do you have you ever questioned it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes, and that's part of what I help people do today. I help people dream in there's a way to dream correctly, if you will. It's also called visioning or having a vision, and then realize the dream, implementing and doing a few things in order for the dream to happen. And for that, yes, there's a whole methodology, and it's part of, for example, of the product that my startup, Planet Emotions, sells. It's a training, coaching, strategic planning, and performance measurement program all in one that helps leaders dream the future that they want to have in the better world that they want to happen, and go from point A where they are now to that point B where they want to be as quickly and efficiently as possible. Yeah. So yes, there is a method.
Yeah. So let's since we've naturally gotten there, let's talk a little bit about your business. Let's talk about the type of work that you like to do, the type of clients that you like to attract and like to work with, and perhaps what it is that you're looking for when you're seeing if there's potentially a good fit for that product or that program. And let's potentially unpack that. How you can go wherever you like with that, but that's maybe we can get into it.
Okay, why don't you ask me what's the first? Where do you want to start? I'd rather you ask me.
Yeah. So, how do you? What are some of the high-level steps that somebody would take if they were to engage with you in your business and purchase this? By the way, are you referring to the Golden Bird Experience? Is that what I see on your website? Is that what
yes? It's the name of my product, the Golden Bird Experience.
Okay, so if somebody was engaging with you and they purchased that product with you, what are some of the high-level things that they might expect and that you would expect from them and that you're going to hope to work towards? Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think I should define the type of client that this is for.
Mm-hmm.
So the Golden Bird Experience is a relatively advanced program. Advanced, I mean, in the area of coaching, you have more or less advanced services. That has to do with the level of personal development or leadership development that the person is in. In coaching, we distinguish stages of personal development, and so it's very simple. There are early stages and later stages of development, and typically later stages, which sometimes are called post-conventional stages, are stages in which there's a better integration of all the intelligences that we have in our mind, in our brain, in our bodies. So there's already a sufficient level of, for example, emotional intelligence, and a sufficient level of understanding that we need to develop all of our intelligences and then being able to better integrate them in order to make better decisions. So this is a little bit more advanced, and my product is for post-conventional leaders and leadership teams. In that category, you typically find as well leaders and leadership teams and organizations that are actually working willingly, very consciously, and they say so, for the better world. They are trying to change the world for the better. So they are engaged in sustainability endeavors, projects, even entire organizations. In this category, you find more advanced leaders in general. So my audience, my clients are in this category, and the product accelerates their development in order for them to be able to solve the frankly extremely complex challenges that the world is facing now. So I believe that in order to be able to solve these very complex and difficult challenges, we need to mobilize all of our intelligences and together we need to be able to fire them together in order to make the best possible decisions, also together, by the way, to solve these problems. And so now to your actual question specifically as to what they go through. They go through first strategic planning exercise in which we discuss what their goals are, what they are trying to achieve, who they are, what are their main problems and weaknesses. I mean, usual strategic planning exercise. And a strategic planning actually includes vision and mission. We have to define it. In general, visions are not sufficiently well defined, I find, overall in the world. You have a lot of organizations that have visions, they state their visions, but these visions typically have a lot of intellectual buzzwords, but you can't relate these words necessarily to an experience that you can see, smell, feel. So you can't relate, and to me that's not a vision. A proper vision is like a teaser, a perceptual teaser. You've got to be able to see something, feel something, hear something, smell something, touch something, taste something when you read this vision or you hear this vision said to you.
It's in the word, right? At the minimum, vision, you have to be able to see
exactly.
it. Right?
People forget that vision is visual. At minimum. Yeah. You were right in this word minimum, because it's not just sight. It's all the senses and all the feelings must be involved in visioning. So we start there, and that, by the way, is a step that can last some time, because I'm helping them connect the part of where the words are, which is the upper left, and the numbers are, with the part where the images are, which is the other hemisphere, and the senses, and also with the limbic part, which is the feeling part and the emotion. So this can take some time, but it's all worth it, because you need to be able to express your vision in that way if you want to have any chance of achieving it.
Yeah.
And so we start with that. And then we say, well, what do we need to reach that vision? And we go through a process of implementing a few activities. Now we will have to, of course, define the action plan, the project, the indicators in a very logical way. But every time we use our feelings and emotions to guide us alongside the logic. So I'm also teaching them, as they are doing this, how they can use their emotions in order to make better decisions, to choose better goals, better metrics, better everything. And one of the components, yes?
Can I just clarify
Please.
something briefly?
Yes.
When you're defining the vision, so obviously a lot of what you're talking about is their like how they're going to work and how they're going to operate and get better results and everything. But when you're like generally, but like when you're talking about the vision specifically, is this purely like, well, not purely, but is the main intent for this to be like an internal vision, like either for the individual or for their team or themselves, like this is how we work, this is how we operate as a team? Or like, because is there do you also work with people to define like vision in the sense of like a marketing team might think of vision or something like that for public facing stuff? I'm just want to clarify.
That's a very good question. I believe that you have vision at every scale. Mm-hmm. For example, one of the things I ask them to define is, okay, what you do contributes to the better world. You must have a vision of what you want the better world to look like. So there's a first level of vision, which is the overall world level. What is the better world for you? What does it have? If you were to film a scene or two in the better world, so let's assume that we have reached the better world and you're looking at it and you're filming it. What are you filming? What are you seeing if you were now to write the script of this? What does it have inside? What do you see? Do you see trees? Do you see houses? Do you see people? What are those people doing? Are they smiling? Are they crying? That's vision. That's vision right there. They will have to tell me what exactly is in the better world as if we were filming it. And the vision is the teaser of that film.
Yeah.
All of it. That's one scale. Once that you have this scale, this vision for this scale, the world scale, the better world, then you also have to imagine a vision for your organization. How does your organization look like? What is it doing? Where is it? Is it in what count? What do you see? What do you hear? Vision for the organization, same thing, and that is different. It's a different scene when you focus on the organization. What you see there, and then you have another scale, which is the team. And there are several scales, and it depends on the organization which scale I'm going to work on with them. But typically, it must have the world, the organization, the team. It could be or the department in between, and then the team, and then the leader. What's the vision for yourself? Where do you, the leader, the CEO, or the VP in sustainability, where do you see yourself in the short, medium term? or as soon as possible. What's the ideal version of yourself that you're seeing, that you know you're not exactly right now, but you want to see becoming? So you have all these levels of vision, and we have to work on all of them. But once you know how to do it, it becomes like very easy and quick to do.
Yeah.
Once you have been able to connect with the parts of your brain and your body that you need in order to do that, then practice makes perfect, and it becomes a second nature. It is nature, actually. It's not a second nature. You become your own nature.
Yeah. I really like thinking of your vision in the detail of being able to define it like a scene and visualizing it that way, because it makes you really think about all the details, especially if you think for a little bit, if you actually were filming a scene for a movie, all the things that you have to consider. The episode hasn't, at the time of right now when we're talking, the episode hasn't come out yet, but I did an interview with 2 independent filmmakers, and one of the things that they talk about is you don't even think about the level of detail of like everything that you need when you write a scene, but like all the things that you have to source and get that you don't even think about when you're writing the scene. So to speak to that level of detail. And it also, I wanted to say, it reminds me of an exercise that I heard of recently, that is, it's not about vision. I mean, it's about vision, but it's not explicitly about vision. It's just about thinking about your life generally, and like how you're like how you would like to live your life. The exercise is basically like, take some time, sit down and think about like, what is your perfect day? If you literally could design it from scratch for you personally, you specifically, what is your perfect day? Literally think about from the moment that you open your eyes in the morning until the moment that you close your eyes at night when you fall asleep. Think about everything that happens in between those 2 things and write it down. Literally write everything you can think of from the moment that your eyes wake up. Literally everything, every little teeny minute detail that you can possibly think of that is like, this is what my perfect day would be. I would love to live this day. And write out all of those details, and just sort of like seeing what that is and just sitting with it, and then how, like, letting that guide you a little bit, and then maybe revisiting it a little bit later on at a later point, and seeing if you've been able to sort of move a little bit closer to that ideal. So that's the exercise that it reminded me of.
Yes, and that's a good exercise. It's a very good exercise. I am close to living my perfect day most of the days, personally. And I've done this exercise, and then we have to redo it, because it's you get closer and closer to perfection. You never reach perfection, and there are things that change. There are certain things that remain the same, like you have to get enough sleep and you have to eat a little bit, but in between there are things that change, the types of activities, the hobbies and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's
and
important.
Then maybe you get closer to that perfect day and you're like, I don't know if this is actually a perfect day. I don't know. I don't know if I want to do this every day. Yeah.
In my perfect day, there's ample opening to being surprised and to just letting life come in. And it's not always agreeable. It's sometimes very uncomfortable. I go through the discomfort and out, and every single time going through the discomfort and out makes you a lot stronger and better. So all is good.
Does that relate at all to the importance of feeling? Is that like going through the discomfort? Is that related to feeling?
Yes.
And the importance of actually having that feeling and going through with it and sitting with it, as opposed to...
I'm talking about feeling.
Yeah.
I'm talking about feeling. There are things that feel uncomfortable, difficult, and that is telling you something, always. something you need to change inside of you or in your behavior. It's telling you something. So you have to make some analysis of why you're feeling these things. And typically, if you do the exercise, you will find the answers, you will analyze, and then you will come out stronger with the lesson that this feeling has given you. But also, when you have a negative or a uncomfortable feeling, what it is telling you is that there is an opposite feeling you need to go to. If you are in negativity, it means you're negating something in life. So what are you negating, and how can you go back into the positive to integrate and to accept and to continue in life? Yeah. So how can you be back in joy and gratitude? And by this, I mean, this is not about sweeping the discomfort under the carpet and move immediately to joy, or find a distraction immediately, or having a glass of wine immediately to not see. We don't do that. I don't do that. I mean, I do have sometimes a glass of wine, but I try to stay with the discomfort long enough until it's delivered its message.
Yeah.
And like it's an important message. I tend to be, like most hypersensitive, I tend to be overreactive to things, because there's this child inside of me that is very reactive, sometimes very angry, and I'm not perfect. Sometimes this child wins and reacts, and so I can hurt people with this. So if I hurt people with this reaction, sometimes then maybe they're going to come back to me and say, well, I'm hurt, this happened, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, yes, I did that. So now, I understand the whole thing. I understand that there's this yet new layer of trauma of this child that I must resolve. And the guilt that I will feel because people are going to tell me, well, what you said and the way you said it really hurt people, then I'm going to understand that I went a little bit overboard in my communication to them. So this is a little example. It happens, it happens to everyone, but the devil is in the details. I do pay attention to every single experience or piece of experience that creates a feeling that is giving me a message. I will listen to the message, I will do something about it, and then I will be able to move on to a higher level of vibration in my body, which is joy and gratitude and humility and compassion and things like that. Those are the higher vibrations.
Would you care at all to elaborate on that actual moving on part? Because it's logical to say it, but sometimes it's so much harder to do it. I know I struggle with it, where it's like when I get in the negative or the darkness and the feelings or the emotions, sometimes I get trapped, or I'll sit with it, and it's like it's too long. It stops me, it blocks me, it covers me and surrounds me, and it's like I'm like creating this thing around myself where it's like I'm not allowing myself to do other things or move forward or grow or get out of it. But it's going to be to a certain large extent, it's very much self-imposed after a certain amount of time, right? So would you care to speak about that at all or elaborate on that?
So It's interesting because you told me earlier in the conversation that you are you believe that you are more uh, uh, logic and science and reason person,
Yeah.
and I could see this with your question because what I feel is that you're asking me to give you in a cognitive way, in a reasoning way, the answer to this question. And there's a point where you can't learn how to swim by reading a book. You have to jump and swim. And so I actually believe that if I try to explain all the steps, like if I were to explain all the steps of how to swim in a book, I mean, it would be a very long book. I actually do this exercise sometimes with people in some workshops. Like, okay, I take two people, and one of them doesn't know how to swim, is in a river, and there is a current, and then the other person is giving the exercise of, at a distance, you have to communicate with words how to teach this person how to swim as quickly as possible so that they can save themselves. That's a super hard challenge. Okay, you raise your arm and then you go up, and can you see how it can be super completely inefficient?
I would probably end up with my own trauma because I would just witness that person die and at my instruction.
Yes. Basically, there are things in life you just have to jump and swim. And so I typically ask my clients, okay, let's take a concrete example. If you were my client, I would ask you, Anthony, give me a concrete example of something that you are willing to share that you feel you got stuck, and then let's unpack together. And I would guide you through it with the example, so we would be swimming together in the current. I'm not sure you want to do this today in this podcast because it involves vulnerability, and not everyone is ready to do that.
Yeah,
does that make sense? Does that make sense, my answer?
It does make sense, and I'll give you an example. We don't have to get like super like specific or granular, but I'll give you like sort of a common example, which is like something that I've sort of like, it's like a pattern for me, like over multiple experiences. For me, it's like I get this thing in my head where it's like I get worked up and I overanalyze and I start to think a lot, and I start to think that it's like what I'm doing and how I'm spending my time. But basically, it's like I'm not living up to my potential, or I'm not meeting my capacity, and it's feelings like I'm not achieving all the things, and then that's sort of like a high level thing, and then when it gets really dark and negative, it gets into like very like you're worthless, like you're nothing, you don't deserve anything, and like look at it's like you're like it gets worse and worse and worse and very negative and cyclic, and then I start to actually believe those things and feel those things. So it's like I haven't it used to be a lot worse previously in my life. I'm in a much better place now, but there were parts of my life where it was sort of fueling me very much day to day. Like that was my energy, that was just like my feeling for most days. So it's like it took me, I sat in that for much longer than I needed. Well, I won't say much longer than I needed to. Maybe I needed to sit in it for as long as I did. But in my thinking about it, I don't think I needed to suffer for as much as I did or as long as I did. But yeah.
So is there anything I could say or do right now to help you with another layer of coming out of this, or what would you like?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay. Because one of the things that I find
really
interesting.
Like anything, I guess I just brought it up as an example of like a feeling for me. I wanted to give it a little bit more color because I said like I struggle, like sometimes I sit with it. So I just wanted to give you a little bit more color. It was like that's an example of like a sort of recurring negative feeling, negative emotion, negative thought that I have, and at previous points in my life it's been more intense.
So this is a very good example. We all have these thoughts and beliefs. And, you know, since you like logic, and the way that it's registered in our brain is almost like a tree, like a hierarchical tree. And so you have lower level thoughts, but there are these overarching beliefs and values that are up there, and everything stems from them. So all your negative thoughts are going to stem from these negative beliefs that are sort of higher in the hierarchy of thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
I see this as a picture, myself, because it helps me. I just don't know how to see it differently than through a picture. It's interesting. So imagine, obviously if it is recurrent, it's because you have one of those overarching values and beliefs up there that is creating constantly these logically derived thoughts. So that's the one we need to target. You need to target and remove and change, replace with another one. So this would be very useful for our audience, actually, if you were to say, and we all have those things, so I hope it wouldn't be too vulnerable, but if you could say, what is you believe in, sort of overarching belief that in your system exists and is sort of creating havoc?
Yeah, I think it's one that probably a lot of people have, but I would say it's like, if I were to make it more general and broad, it would be something along the lines of I am not enough. That
not
type
enough
of a thing. Yeah.
Okay. So you see, I am not enough is a very serious thing.
Yeah.
Let me tell you why. When you say I am, and then after I am you write something, anything, what you're doing is that you are attaching something to your identity. I am is who you are. It's your identity. So if you attach something negative, not enough, after I am, to your identity, you are negating something that simply cannot be negated. Like it's completely impossible to be not anything. With such a thought, such a belief, you can only feel super miserable. Super miserable. But that misery is telling you, that's the message of the misery. The misery is telling you, Anthony, this is a completely wrong thought. The level and intensity of the misery is telling you how wrong, how faulty the corresponding thought or belief is. I am, anything negative after I am is going to create a level of misery that is alerting you, hey, no, that's not the way. We're not, alert, alert, red flags all over. You are a wonderful human being. I am a wonderful human being. We all are a wonderful human being. Not enough is simply completely wrong. It's a wrong thought. So in order to get all the way to healing this, the best way I know is to replace, like I somehow just did, to replace the part that needs to be replaced, because now you used your reason, you know it's not true, by something else, to replace the thought literally, physically, as a tangible thing in your little tree in here. You replace it with another thought. So I am blah blah blah. What do you want to replace the not enough with?
I am we'll say just an example. I'll say I am charismatic. I like that about myself a lot.
I'm charismatic.
Yeah.
I am charismatic. That's a good one. It's a good attribute. How does it feel when you say it? Does it feel aligned?
It makes me feel good. It does feel
Feels
aligned.
good.
Yeah. I am not enough feels like disruptive, and like I'm like digging a hole in myself, like I'm wearing myself away when I say I'm not enough.
Okay. Now, if I push you to find something a little bit more fundamental, because charismatic is an attribute, there's nothing wrong with that. You want to be charismatic.
Yeah.
But what are you, Anthony?
I
What
could say
are you?
I'm a leader. I'm a communicator. I try to be a teacher and a mentor and a good friend. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think you're a wonderful human being.
Thank you.
You're
I think
first
you're a
of
wonderful
all
human being too, by the way.
Well, you're first of all a wonderful human being. I believe
Yeah.
every single human being is a wonderful human being.
Yeah.
All of us are.
Yeah.
Fundamentally. And then we have this projection, like an avatar that we project in the world. We have an avatar. It's the ego. And this ego is our projection in the world, in space-time. Just think it that way. So who you are and this avatar are not the same.
Right. Right.
They are. So you're projecting an avatar, your ego in the world. It's your ego who interacts with others, with me right now. But your ego is not necessarily who you are.
Right.
It is the person you want to project in the world. You want this person to be charismatic, to be a leader, to be. Those are the roles and the attributes you want your avatar to have in order to interact in space-time with other people. And that's great. And you do need to have. You do need the ego. You do need the avatar, and that's what you're doing. My avatar is currently talking with yours.
I was really liking that conversation that we were having.
We can have other conversations if you would like, you know.
Yeah, I was really liking that conversation that we were having, and I think it was really valuable. But I think it was along the lines of like feelings and like a lot of it, and that was kind of where we started with it. And one of the things that I mentioned at the top towards the beginning of our call that I really wanted to bring up with you, because you sort of identified more as a person who is on the feeling side of the spectrum, and I'm sort of a person who identifies more on the thinking, reasoning side of the logic side of the spectrum. I wanted to sort of talk about that because that is something that like both in my like relationship with a partner, a woman, a girlfriend, and then relationships with business people, like professionally, people that I worked very closely with, people who have we've taken like the Myers-Briggs tests, things like that, Myers-Briggs personality assessment, where if you're curious, are you familiar with Myers-Briggs?
Yes.
And so if you're curious, I'm ENTP, which is extroverted.
I don't.
Yeah.
You know, this is interesting because I don't use the Myers-Briggs precisely because right now you just said an acronym, and I don't know what that means because I prefer tools that are like the Enneagram. The Enneagram to me is more organic, corresponds to better to what I use as tools. The MBTI to me is way too intellectual.
Okay.
It's not a bad tool. It's not a bad tool. It's a great tool, but to me, it feels way too intellectual.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the only reason that I brought that up is because, like, for me, that's kind of a frame of reference of like that's kind of how I learned about certain spectrums, like there's an obvious one like extroverted introverted spectrum, but then like the thinking feeling spectrum is like, that's just kind of how I relate to it, is through that lens, just because that's how I learned it. Is like on one side of the spectrum you have thinking, which is where I landed, at least on that test, and then the other side is feeling. And I found myself like realizing that I was sort of unintentionally coming off as like very aggressive and harsh to certain people in the way that I was communicating. And there was also
well, good for you. That's good for you to realize and becoming aware. This is wonderful.
Yeah, and it's like just like understanding that it's like I have to, like, because I have a tendency to just speak, right? Like I like words come to me pretty quickly and pretty easily. And I envy you, Anthony, because I have the opposite problem, but also the opposite gift. So you need what I have, and I need what you have. Yeah. And that's exactly what I was going to bring up, is the person that I was working very closely with professionally. He was on the feeling side of things, and he was somebody who, he's not like me. First of all, very intelligent, highly intelligent person, and I like utmost respect for him. But he doesn't think as quickly as I do in conversation, and it takes him longer to get out a sentence. Like he'll pause between words. He thinks very, very carefully, and he's very cautious in his speaking. He doesn't want to say something that's going to get misinterpreted. He doesn't want to say something incorrect. He's very, very cautious and meticulous with the words that he uses in his speaking, and he'll pause between sentences. And I'm not like that. I'll speak very quickly, and sometimes he'll pause to think, and I'd completely mess him up because I jump in and I fill the pause and I start talking. And it's like he paused, he stopped talking, that means he's done. But it's not. He's actually thinking, and it takes him longer to get out his ideas, and they're good ideas and they're valid, but I'm not going to get to hear them because every time he takes a minute to pause and gather his words and gather his thoughts, I jump in and I respond to the thing that he said, but it's like he didn't actually even get to his point yet, and I'm responding to like his setup basically. So I have experience working with people where I had to, he's very different than me in that way.
Yeah, and that is very interesting, because what you just described has feeling, but you're not seeing if I were to ask you what's the feeling that is present in you when you are listening to him, what are the feelings that are present inside of your body when you're listening to him, or the emotions?
If I'm being conscious of the fact that we have these differences.
Now I'm asking you to be conscious and tell me what you believe those feelings to be when you are with him.
Yeah. Is empathy a feeling? I don't think is empathy.
Can you say that again?
Is empathy a feeling? I don't think empathy is a feeling, is it?
It is related to a feeling, but it's also something else.
Okay.
Is it okay if I share with you what I felt you were, one of the feelings that I could see you were having when you were talking about this interaction?
Please.
There was a little bit of impatience.
Yeah.
You wanted this to not be. You wanted to just, hey, I don't want to go there. You actually, and that is related to fear. There's a fear there. You fear what this person is sort of forcing you in a way to do. You don't want to go there. You don't want to go to the feeling side. You're afraid of them. So there's a fear. So what I'm seeing is, first of all, a lot of feelings. I'm sort of seeing a lot of feelings and emotions to sort of in a bundle here, but there's one that is in front of the others, and it's fear. And this fear, of course, is sort of blocking. I don't want to go there because I'm afraid of going there. Does that make sense? So there's fear, and then there's fear of the other feelings which are behind. So there's a little bundle here that we could unbundle if we were in a session, but we're not going to. But I want to show you that if you were to become aware of your feelings in that moment or after, like you're doing now, because you can always do it afterwards, doesn't need to be in the moment. In the moment you're feeling those things, and then you can, in the evening, you can say, okay, what happened there? And you go back and you become conscious of whatever happened in that experience, and then, okay, what are those feelings telling me? Oh, I'm afraid of my feelings, basically. I'm afraid. I don't want to go there. What could I do to unblock this? I mean, my suggestion to you is really to try and unblock it, because it's going to open so many more possibilities for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It probably makes more sense than you realize. I mean, fear is definitely like a very like high level fundamental thing that I've struggled with. It's fear, and then it relates to a lot of other feelings as well. Shame.
It's all over. Fear is for everyone. It's an overarching, very important emotion for everyone, and it has its extremely important and good purpose, and also it can be excessive or be where it shouldn't be, because it's preventing you from going in the direction of what is beneficial for you.
Yeah.
It is not in your best interest the moment it goes into too much or not where it should be.
Right. And that's, for me, easy, obvious struggle that I've dealt with a lot. For lots of people, though, it's common where it's like, that's where it can become detrimental, is when you don't do the things that are like the most important to you, or the things that are like the greatest relevance to you, or the things that you want the most. You don't do them like almost entirely out of fear in many cases.
Yes. And one of the fears that I have seen as a very prevalent thing, especially in people who are dominantly reasoning and science people, I say dominantly because you're not only that, you're always a multiple beautiful being, but who dominantly resort to thinking in science. Mm-hmm. The main fear I see quite frequently is the fear of feeling itself. So that's like blocking everything, frankly, because it's like, if we open this door, now we can improve everything. But there's this first door, which is the fear of feeling.
Yeah.
Itself.
Yeah. Because
of all sorts of course, previous experiences, but that goes without saying. Well, that fear is relatively easy to remove, but of course we need to go through that in a session.
Yeah. I briefly brought up the word empathy when I asked you earlier if it was an emotion or a feeling. I wanted to ask you a little bit about empathy, because and maybe the connection with empathy and feelings and emotions, because I know from my own personal experience, I feel that the times when I went through, I've sort of already alluded to, like, there's like a time in my life previously where I had like you, I mean, I'm younger than you, but like you, in my life, I had periods where I consider a prolonged periods of darkness and negativity and different bad things. I believe that going through those periods, and even though it was prolonged, it took a while, but feeling those feelings, feeling that way, feeling that negatively about myself, and having myself be sort of like sitting in the darkness in the hole for a while, I believe it made me a more empathetic person. overall in the end. I believe it increased my capacity for empathy, or at least if it didn't increase my capacity for empathy, it at least just lifted up my baseline empathy levels. Like however you'd like to think about it, I'm not sure which one of those it is, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the connection between empathy and feelings.
First of all, every word has a corresponding feeling and a corresponding movement of the body. Empathy is a word. As a word, it is a thought, and it is a feeling, and it is a movement of the body. Empathy, just one word. So it is all of these things. Empathy, therefore, is also a feeling, and it's also a behavior. And it has the feeling and the behavior that corresponds to what it means, which is to relate to another person's feelings, and that's what you have achieved. And yes, you're correct that the more you go through darkness and negative emotions, and if you can come out of them, then you become stronger and you actually increase your emotional intelligence and your empathy. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You increase your empathy by going through all these experiences. You develop into a more empathetic person.
Yeah.
That is completely natural, and it happens to all of us who simply go through experiences and learn from them.
Yeah.
So you can.
Thank you.
I sense, however, forgive me, but I sense a lot. I sense, however, that you are. I sense some vibration of compassion in the empathy. So sometimes those are related. You know, compassion is a little bit different. It's another word with a feeling, you know, a specific vibration, feeling, and behavior. Compassion is you are going to feel a form of love and support for the person you are being empathetic with. It is slightly different.
Yeah.
It sometimes come together. Empathy can have bad sides because you can be bombarded by the other person's negative emotions, which was my case. I had zero boundaries when growing up, and if I don't pay attention, even today, my boundaries are not there, and I get all the influence of negative emotions inside of my own territory and body. So that's not good, because then I have to do some work to remove it, clean it out.
Yeah.
So too much empathy can be a problem.
Yeah.
This is something we need to manage, but I somehow heard you were also talking about compassion, even though you didn't speak the word. Because I felt the vibration of it, and compassion is a superiorly positive emotion.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is a superiorly positive emotion, high vibration.
Yeah.
We need a lot more compassion in the world, but it's one of the very positive emotions we all want to have in our mix every day. Does that make sense, what I just said?
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with you. I think as soon as you said the word compassion, I understood that was actually a more accurate word, a better word to describe what I was talking about, because I think if I can maybe extrapolate part of what you said, compassion, it's like the positive good feeling of understanding, like without needing any context of like a situation or like what's going on or something like that. And empathy is maybe a little bit more to like trying to understand what's going on, like what's like the situation, right?
Yes, the way I see empathy is to relate to the other person's feelings. So you're literally feeling what they're feeling, and that can be good or bad. I mean, in terms of the outcome of it, you need a little bit of it. You know, I have empathy because I couldn't be able to do my job otherwise. I feel the other person's vibration. I feel them, but now I've learned to protect myself from any bad outcome that could come out of that, you know, because otherwise I could also not do my job correctly.
Yeah. Well,
and so
Catherine, we've already... No, because please finish, please.
No, I was going to say probably the same, that we have to...
Yeah, we've ran out of time. Thank you very much. We already went longer than we needed to. I didn't get a chance. I feel like we could talk about so much more. You're working on a book. You're finishing a book. I didn't get a chance to ask you specifically about it. Maybe at some point in the future we can have a part 2. Do you have anything that you want to say, just final words for you, anything at all about your book or just your message or anything you'd like to leave the audience with?
Well, I want to leave you with this, Anthony. You are a wonderful human being, and every single human being on earth is a wonderful human being. That's what I want to leave here.
Thank you so much for that message. And Catherine, you are a wonderful human being, and I appreciate your time and your knowledge. And like I said, maybe at some point in the future we can do something part 2. Yeah.
I would love to. You know, I love these types of conversations because I feel we sharing something we know is important. I think is very important. I will say important several times, but I think it's important to share what we believe can help other people. So, anytime, Anthony.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.